Go. We're back at it, and we're up for another rendition of America under Adams and Jefferson. Despite Washington's warnings, now Washington pretty much said, "Listen, you know, you got to keep the politics in order. You got to make sure that the foreign policy and everything's straight." But he was saying the problems continued, so it was like Washington had to try to send a plan to help out Adams and Jefferson under their actual rule or whatnot. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. So Washington's farewell address was pretty simple. He talked about the dangers of sectionalism and what that is. I know it says right here, but it's pretty much sectioning yourself off from the rest of the population, and is basically, with loyalty of your own needs. Like for an example, you know, he talked about if sectionalism takes place, then that's going to lead to what it led to on down the road, which is pretty much civil war. So that was part of it. That he was calling it. He said we need national unity, which that's what everybody wants. Everybody wants that Ohana approach, which is Polynesian for or Hawaiian or for everybody moving forward, not just one group, but everybody moving. And then he talked about the dangers of political parties. Political parties, they can divide the country, which would slow down the progress. And then he talked about foreign alliances. He said, America should only trade with other countries. That's it. Alliances with other countries could pull America into war. So basically, Washington was being a prophet. You know, he was telling you, look, if you do this, then this is gonna happen. If you do this is gonna happen. If you do that, and see, and that's what you don't realize. Back in this time, yeah, it was political, but at the same time, most of these presidents, they were more like gritty. And when I say gritty, I'm just talking about gritty to the fact of like this is, the basics. There is no dodging this and talking around that. It's like boom, here it is. If you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. So the legacy, everybody talks about George Washington being the first president, all that stuff. But what did he actually like? What did he do? Like what mark did he leave? On this newfound country, and he helped strengthen the federal government as one of the things. Served only 2 terms, then he retired because he was saying, he was trying to set an example for the future presidents because he was like, look, if you crave this power, then you'd be no different than the government we try to free ourselves from or get rid of. So here's what people don't realize. A lot of people think with Washington's presidency, after he served 2 terms and stepped down, everybody thought that Washington actually wanted to. Everybody thought that that the amendment was put in place where the president can only serve 2 terms. And actually, the amendment was passed right after FDR had passed away. So that's when it was the 22nd Amendment came, where it was saying that no president can only serve 2 terms. It wasn't Washington. It was not Washington at all. It was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he established foreign policy. Washington, where I at, he, established foreign policy and neutrality, which the country tried to follow for a while. So that's pretty much his legacy that he left. And every president tried to mark themselves after this guy. So election of 1796. So you had President John Adams, who was a Federalist, and then you had Thomas Jefferson, who was a Democratic Republican. You see right here where it talks about where you can see how the country was, or the country at this point in time was divided. It really was. It really was. So the trouble continues with Europe. So you had, which you'll hear about the XYZ affair, and that's in another module. But if you look at it, it was pretty much France was angry at Jay's Treaty, which we discussed earlier, And Jay's Treaty, it was talking about capturing American ships as well. So, Adams sent some diplomats to France, hoping to not have like this war, because it was like from friends to foes in a matter of seconds. So, three French agents, X, Y, and Z, they demanded $250,000 bribe from American diplomats just to sit down and talk about it. And it was almost like a slap in the face. So therefore, that didn't go over very well. So that's what the XYZ affair, which led to a couple things. Yeah, that's that monster they try to talk about right there. So that was the issue that was going on at that point in time. War with France, the quasi war. Nobody really talks about the quasi war. The reason why they really don't, because I mean, it wasn't one of those things where it was an earth-shattering, results from it. Americans are furious over the XYZ affair. From them dudes sitting there talking about I want 250,000 just to sit down and talk. That was like a slap in the face. That means that's like you ain't really trying to fix anything. You're really not. You're just trying to be an idiot. So the Federalists, they called for war. America began capturing French ships, almost like reverse impressment. They were capturing these ships, and that's kind of at this point in time in history, that's all you could do. All you could do is hijack, because most of your trade happened on the sea. So that's why pirates and stuff like that was pretty much top. Was at its pinnacle at that point in time. But the quasi war, it really wasn't official war. It was almost like Vietnam. People say Vietnam War. It really wasn't. It's the correct name for it is Vietnam conflict. American French ships, they fired on each other at sea, and it was pretty much kept out to sea. It really didn't come down to hand-to-hand combat when it comes to ground troops and a full all-out war. And the convention of 1800 was pretty simple. It was a treaty between America and France, and they agreed to keep peace and avoid the war. It doesn't mean you actually like each other. You just avoid the war. That's what it pretty much was. So, and now, like I said, there's a little side thing on it if you want to know more about it. Now, there's a little side thing on this as well, the Alien Sedition Acts. And it was used, it was hurting the French immigrants. So it's pretty much, it wanted to push the French immigrants back out of the idea of, because here's what you had. I'm gonna put a little bit of world history in this too, kind of fill it in. Because you think about this on a world scale. The French did not like, the French, after they had a revolution, and during the French Revolution, the French revolutionaries actually abolished slavery. And everybody thought that was ludicrous. But they abolished slavery all throughout the French colonies as well. That didn't go over well, especially on a little island called Haiti. So a lot of people did not really want to talk to the French, especially Americans, because if the French would hit these French ports and start sitting there talking about how, they liberate, the French revolutionaries, they liberated, Africans and all this kind of stuff, the colonists really didn't want to hear that, because if you start inspiring blacks, then what's going to happen is they're going to revolt as well. You're going to get them some admiration. You're going to give them something to inspire them. And they didn't want that at that point in time, because it's going to start having troubles in the colonies. So it wasn't just that; it was a lot of different things. And so what they wanted to do is they were trying to attack the French immigrants, and they wanted to make it hard for them to become citizens, and then have them kicked out of the country. And then some of them wouldn't let French merchant ships even port for certain lengths of time. So, and the Sedition Act, it made speaking or writing against the government illegal. So anything, it was almost like, it was almost limiting that freedom of speech type deal in a way. So, good old fashioned brawl. With the Alien Sedition Acts, these laws were called what you call power grabs. And that's pretty much self-explanatory. So the Federalists was like, you know what, man, we ain't trying to do all this right now. We ain't trying to make this happen and none of that stuff. So um, Democrats, they voted. The ones that voted, they were attacked literally. Anybody that criticized the Federalists, they could control the government was illegal, and they said, "Why the Supreme Court stopped this?" Number one, you can see these guys over here pointing and laughing. That really didn't go too well. So anyway, so you have the Virginia, Kentucky resolutions. It was pretty simple in this concept. So the state governments in Virginia, Kentucky, they passed resolutions, and they basically were saying, that we're not going to honor this Alien Sedition Act. They called for acts that were unconstitutional, and they pushed for nullification. Anytime you nullify something, that means that you try to erase it out like it doesn't even exist. So that's pretty much what the nullification was. So that's what the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions had done. Nullification. Ah, yes. Again, the idea that states can reject federal laws and they can find it unconstitutional. And you'll hear that word nullification here in probably about 20 years from now, or at this point in time in history. So the future impact. This set the precedent for states to challenge federal governments. And that was the main cause of the Civil War right there. And it's funny because Washington put in these things that says, "Hey, I'm prophesizing. Watch out for this, this, this," and then or this country's not going to progress, or it's going to be slow to progress, and then all of a sudden, it's almost like they kind of went against Washington by saying, "Hey, but we're going to put in this nullification, and anything that's unconstitutional, we're going to turn around and be able to kick it out or reject the idea of it being something being constitutional or unconstitutional." So yes, nullification had led to a fallout. So the election of 1800. All right, so you look at this. So it calls Americans. It calls Americans to vote for Democratic Republicans. And then you have the idea of dirty politics. But right here, you look at Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. They tied for the most votes. So now you had a dead draw. So the House of Representatives, they were responsible for choosing the president. So when you had a deadlock, there you go. That means that the House of Representatives have to come up with choosing a president, which can make it a very tedious process. So you got deals in the House. You had Hamilton, got the Jefferson, and he promised support from the Bank of the United States, which is also known as the bus. In return, Hamilton got the House vote for Jefferson, who became the president. So that's how Jefferson became president, just that quick. And then you had the Revolution of 1800. And why is it important? It's important because it showed that the power could be moved back and forth between parties, which was rare, but it could be done peacefully. In other words, a lot you see where they started fighting and all this kind of stuff. Because here's what happened: the tension between Hamilton and the Vice President Burr. Yeah, they pretty much got a little upset. And at this point in time, you can have this thing called a duel, and you've seen duels. But the thing with a duel is you can challenge someone and it be legal, which is pretty barbaric, might I add, but could be, I guess, exciting. And then with that duel, because he was so mad, they actually not sat down, but they actually stood toe to toe, and they had this duel. And Burr had challenged Hamilton to this duel, and in the axe, Burr shot and killed him. Yeah, that's kind of bad. You have to stand there and watch that go down. It could be, some people are like, man, that's cool, but it could actually be kind of traumatizing. So the Federalists were trying to cling to power. So the Anti-Federalists are pretty much gaining control. And, with Jefferson in presidency, which wasn't a bad thing, may I add, before Jefferson took office, Adams tried to keep Federalists in power. So what he tried to do is, again, he tried to appoint some last minute Federalist judges to kind of keep that power balance at the last second. So it was a power move, and it would limit the Democratic Republican power because now you got people. You have a president that that might be anti-federalist, uh, but then you have judges in that triangle that our government set up as. They keep that balance, so they're going to keep everything from kind of going one way, and that led to one thing called Mulberry versus Madison. And what I've done, I'll talk about this. However, I do have a side gig on that, so I do link below. You'll have a Mulberry versus Madison, and it pretty much puts the pictures with the people and move them around and discuss them like they're supposed to be discussed. So, but the biggest thing you must know: judicial review, Judiciary Act of 1789, judicial review. That means that the Supreme Court could rule that something laws could be, unconstitutional. Now, people ask the question: what's the biggest court case in history? And some people say the Mulberry versus Madison because now you can go back, and that's what led to the amendments of the Constitution. Now, let's swing to real estate. So Spain gave France Louisiana Territory in 1800, and Jefferson wanted America to access New Orleans and the Mississippi River. That's the whole reason why because Jefferson was like a businessman. Because you think about Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had he owned Monticello, which is now where where UVA is, University of Virginia, and he ran like a corporation. It wasn't just he owned slaves. He trained his slaves to do certain things so people could buy things from him like nails, and all that kind of stuff. And I'll actually have something on the duality of Thomas Jefferson, and we'll talk about it later on. But so you'll have a little side gig on Jefferson. So Jefferson was a businessman. He was almost. I'm gonna be honest with you, and I know people say this about Trump, that's about Trump, yada yada yada. It's not about Trump. However, one thing that we do know that Trump is a businessman, very successful businessman. So that's kind of how Jefferson was when it comes to looking at money and real estate and investments and yada yada yada. So, but he did it kind of backwards. So it was like 830,000 acres, and Napoleon was pretty much on the back pedal and needed money, so he sold it for mere chump change at that point in time. And it was, like I said, it was 830,000 acres, and that 830,000 acres was actually pretty good. So that's kind of where that's kind of the thing with the Louisiana Purchase. But I do have something linked for the Louisiana Purchase, so it's almost like this is the main thing, and we have little side things. It's almost like a Marvel Universe type approach I'm taking here. So Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon sold the entire, Louisiana territory for $15 million. Now, here's how Jefferson looked at it. Jefferson looked at it like we can get our goods to the river, down the Mississippi, out into the Gulf, and out across the ocean with minimal cost. So that's the thing. He owned New Orleans and the Mississippi River, and which was, like I said, which is great for trade. Also doubled the size of the acres and acres and acres that he had pretty much gotten. And also, if you look at where Louisiana is at that point in time, the Louisiana Territory, that's pretty much the Midwest. So therefore, there's a lot of farmland that could be had out there as well. So it was like a lot of stuff that was going on in this situation. So this is it right here. This is what Louisiana Territory ended up being when we first purchased it. So it did double the size. And all this is known as the Midwest or the breadbasket of the United States, of the world, actually, but especially the United States. So this is pretty good that he had this. And now he had to get people out on it to actually farm. And that's what led to Western migration, which we'll jump into later. Now, here's the thing. Was it constitutional? That's the thing. Did he go against? Yes. I mean, yeah, you look at it. He went against the strict interpretation. Because here's the thing, he bought the Louisiana Territory without authority from the Constitution. He did. Now, here's the thing: if it was 830,000 acres of swampland, then Jefferson probably be the biggest bust there is in American history. But and he actually did it backwards. He bought it, and then he sent some individuals. He said Zebulon Pike and Lewis and Clark Zebulon Pike went through the southern tip, and Lewis and Clark actually went through to all the way to find the Northwest Territory. They were trying to find the Pacific Ocean. So they tried to, it's like, usually what you do is you walk the land, you look at the land, you make sure it ain't a floodplain, then you purchase it. So that was the bad thing about Thomas Jefferson at that time. He kind of went. So exploring the West, you had the Lewis and Clark expedition, which I have for you, and its core discovery. And you'll see, the primary mission was to find water route for the Pacific Ocean for trade, and that was the goal. But in that journey, you talk about Sacagawea and people like that. So that pretty much, I have a little side clip that'll actually show you. It's actually like a little mini documentary that shows you kind of what happened during that. So we talk about Lewis and Clark again. They did a lot of things. People think they just walked. They actually did scientific stuff. They wrote, they chronicled, they journaled, they did all those things. And Sacagawea was their lifeline because she could speak a lot of Native American languages at that point in time. So the results. No water route was discovered. It did not exist. Many new plants and animals were discovered, though. But so that's kind of what the core discovery come out with. Then you have the thing called the manifest destiny. There's a guy, and I'll link this so you'll see that. But there was a guy, and he came up with the idea of the same as John O'Sullivan. John O'Sullivan came out with this thing called the manifest destiny, and it was foreshadowed. But we'll talk about that a little later as well. Expedition boosted American claims to the Oregon Territory. But we'll get to that later. I don't want to kick this can too far. Keep it too close because it'll confuse you if you're not confused already. But Americans increasingly began to move west, now because you have farmland. And it's basically because Lewis and Clark were the front runners, and they made sure that these, it was safe. It wasn't 830,000 acres of swampland. So there you go. That's what it ended up being. And a lot of people actually, that paved the way for Western migration. So anyway, I just want to go ahead and give you that. And like I said, make sure you look at everything and make sure you fill out your notes. If you have any questions, I will be there to answer them and we'll close the gaps. Thank you very much.